So, continuation on this section. This part is about the geometric mean. So make sure you're on the right portion of your paper. It says geometric mean and notes and worksheet at the top. We're going to do these examples together that have boxes around them. And then you're going to have 12 questions at the end. So the geometric mean we've been talking about, we found the geometric mean between two numbers. We actually find out that it also works with the triangles in another way. The altitude is the geometric mean between the two segments that it creates on the hypotenuse. The altitude is the geometric mean between segment 1 and segment 2. That means that if you're setting it up as a proportion, you put altitude so that it gets multiplied by itself when we cross multiply, and we put the segments on the other diagonal. So write that down. Altitude, or segment 1 over altitude, equals altitude over segment 2. Segment 1 over altitude equals altitude over segment 2. So the altitude is the geometric mean between the two segments that it creates. The easiest way to do these problems, if you want to see the shortcut, is what are we going to do when we solve this? Cross multiply. So the altitude squared will be equal to the segment times the segment. Okay, that's another way of thinking about it. Altitude squared equals segment 1 times segment 2. I would write that down because I think it's a shortcut and I think it's easier to remember. You don't have to think about where you're placing it in the proportions. Altitude squared equals segment 1 times segment 2. Okay? So let's look at an example here. Now we have numbers in our drawing. What does X stand for? Which part of the drawing? The altitude. So the altitude is, X is the altitude, right? It's the geometric mean. So that means that we're going to say, oops, let me go back. My fault. Okay, we're going to say X squared equals what times what? 5 times 2. Okay. What is 5 times 2? 10. So if X squared equals 10, let's take the square root. And since there are no perfect squares in either 5 or 2, our answer is the square root of 10. What questions do you have about this slide? Easy, right? Okay, the altitude squared equals segment times segment. So far, so good? All right. We can move them around, right, and have the X be part of the segments, or one of the segments. So the altitude is still the mean. What's my equation going to say here? 7's the altitude, so we're going to square it and multiply these guys together, right? So 49, or 7 squared, equals 4 times X. Okay? How do we get the X by itself? We divide. So 49 over 4 is perfectly fine for an answer. It's reduced. It's in lowest terms. Or you can give me 12.25, right? Or 12 1/4. Yep. All are equivalent. You can give them in any of those forms. Okay? What questions do you have about this slide? Aaron and Nathan, you guys have a question about this? Okay. We're good? Which one? That's a squared. Mm-hmm. Okay. Not yet. Okay, next one. Not only is the altitude the geometric mean between the two segments, but the leg is also the geometric mean between the portion that is adjacent to it and the whole hypotenuse. Okay? The leg is the geometric mean between the segment that is adjacent to it, that's next to it, and the whole hypotenuse. Okay, so let's see how that works. If this is a leg, it's going to be the mean, so it's going to be squared. And we multiply the segment that is next to it, that touches it, by the whole hypotenuse. So if you set it up as a proportion, it's going to say that the segment over the leg equals the leg over the hypotenuse. If you don't want to write the proportions, you simply say leg squared equals the adjacent segment times the whole hypotenuse. You have to make sure it's the segment that's next to it, and you have to make sure you're using the whole. Yep, the adjacent segment and the whole hypotenuse. Okay? So let's see this at work with numbers. And remember, if they move the leg, then you have to talk about the segment that is next to it, the adjacent segment. Okay? So here are some numbers to work with. So this time x is the leg, right? Okay? The leg is the mean, so x squared equals we are on the, yep, okay. So x squared equals the one next to it times the whole hypotenuse. Does everyone see where we got those? The leg is the mean between the segment that's adjacent to it and the whole hypotenuse. 6 is adjacent, the whole hypotenuse is 10. X is the square root of 60. Now, one other thing to think about is, shall we, instead of putting them together, since we're going to have to break them apart anyway, what is 60? 3 times 2 and 2 times 5. What's my pair? The 2's are coming out and 15 stays inside. Okay? So you can save yourself some work if you don't multiply them together. Just split them, find their product of primes, and find the perfect square. Questions you have about this slide? Okay, this one's good. Okay. Next example. Okay, this is as hard as this one gets. 9 squared, we know which one we're going to square, right? 9 squared will be equal to, the leg is the mean between the part that's next to it and the whole hypotenuse. Which portion is adjacent to 9? 5, right? What's the whole hypotenuse? Not 5 times x. Okay. Is it 5 times x? What if x was 1? You'd tell me the whole hypotenuse was
5 plus x.
6, right? If x was 2, you'd tell me the whole hypotenuse was 7. So what are you doing here? Adding. So it's going to be 5 plus x. So 9 is the geometric mean between 5 and 5 plus x. How do we work that out? Distribute. 81 equals 25 plus 5x when we distribute 5 to both, taking away 81 from both sides, or 25 from both sides. 56 equals 5x. Dividing by 5, 11.2 equals x. And you can leave it as 56/5 too. And the next problem is the same problem. So I need you to make your change on your sheet so it matches mine. First, does anybody have a question on these? Okay. Next question or next problem. Make yours match mine. 15 for this segment, 7 for another. This is now x, and make the 9 go away. Cross it off. The leg squared is the x squared, because this is the leg of the... And we have to add 15 plus 7, and we get 22. So x squared is equal to, which one's next to it? And then what's the whole hypotenuse? Okay. 7 times 22 is 2 and 11, right? Times 7, there's going to be no perfect squares there. So you're going to just multiply them together. And when we take the square root, x will be the plain old square root of 154. That's in simplest terms. Okay? All right. So don't forget the problem right next to this. It doesn't have a box around it. It's number 1. But this is your assignment, is to finish off the rest of this sheet. Do the portions at the bottom. And don't forget this one. Okay?